You have one unheard message.
I just wanted to call and let you know that I think I had a Christmas miracle because the next morning when I woke up, I was just so calm. I was so calm and happy, and it's been like that ever since. And so first of all, I wanted to let you know that I'm so happy that you came. I know how distressed and upset and right away depressed as soon as you said what you were here for. Well, it's not like that anymore. I think God finally answered my prayers.
I'm 24-Hour News 8's Brian Sterling. Investigative reporter Ken Kolker has covered accusations of abuse by clergy in the Catholic Church for almost 20 years. It is a topic that continues to rip at the very fabric of the Church, testing the will of the faithful as the bishops try to navigate the accusations, authorities, and accommodations related to the abuse of priests. This is not a story that has arrived at a happy ending. Our conversation will serve to illuminate this gut-wrenching story and the lengths the Church has gone to shield itself from the horrors committed on children at the hands of priests. Ken, let's talk about the voicemail that you received. And in all of your years as working as a journalist, this one had to have stood out.
I don't think I've gotten a voicemail like that before. And just to hear her voice and knowing that most of her kids didn't know, her husband knew few details. And the backstory is I knocked on her door, cold called because I had heard her name, and she invited me in. And she was okay with me recording it on my phone as she told the story that her husband knew few details about. And to hear her call the next day, I mean, it brought tears to my eyes. It's like, this is why it's important.
Right. And the not telling and the keeping it a secret was so pivotal for this to continue on for so many years.
And the fact that she's felt guilt, like this was part of this was her fault for all those years. And in a follow-up in conversation with her, she said it's the first time she hasn't felt guilt since this happened.
This is a podcast designed to illuminate a little bit of your investigative techniques and some of the stuff you found in the course of this story.
Yes.
These are not new cases.
No, these are not new cases. Most of them are, we go as far back as 1958. The most recent was 2002 that we can find. And those are there were two girls who were molested by a priest up in Sparta. And that's the last known allegation in the Grand Rapids Diocese.
Watching this story, obviously many of the allegations, as you said, are from decades ago. Some of the accused priests, in fact, are dead. But the victims remain. They're still out there.
Talking to the victims, they want to use the word survivors. And they live with this every day.
Yeah, it is hard to talk about. Well, I was an altar boy, so I imagine I was around 13. Then he convinced, he wanted a back rub. And I didn't think nothing of it, but I didn't want to, I told him I didn't want to, and he said, well, come on, trying to use my youth or whatever against me, and then he wanted to give me a back rub, and then he started going too far, and then I freaked out.
You focus primarily on the Grand Rapids Diocese in your story, but let's be frank, this is an international problem for the Catholic Church.
Oh,
and it has been for decades.
Yeah, absolutely. And what got us started on this was what happened in Pennsylvania. So we've started working on this in August because we wanted to take a look at, revisit what happened in the Grand Rapids Diocese. And then the Michigan Attorney General's office announced that it was doing an investigation. So we wanted to take a look at some of what they might find here.
You mentioned back in 2002, and in fact, we covered that story here at Channel 8, went down to Dallas for the Bishops' Convention at the time when the sexual abuse really came out into the sunshine, and they wanted to address it full on and give it the full weight and authority of the Church looking at this issue. How have they done? How have the Catholic Church? Has the Catholic Church done since 2002?
Well, the diocese they've set up plans to address sins like this against children. I mean, they've got things set up where They have to go through, seminars and updates, and, they've got to instantly report this stuff to the police. You were talking about 2002. Back in 2002, I was covering this when I was at the Grand Rapids Press. And there was one particular priest, Denny Wagner, who had molested 6 boys. And I tracked down some of the survivors, and 3 of them in particular who had never met each other. And they wanted to meet, so I facilitated a meeting. We sat at like a Fridays at a big round table, and I'm listening as they're trading stories, trying to figure out, who was first and what church were you going to and who was next. And it was kind of mind-blowing.
In fact, that's one of the telling contrasts, I think, in your reporting, is that the victims feel like they've been left behind, that they haven't been given the adequate care or attention from the church that these accused priests have.
Be out there living healthy lives, receiving healthy pensions, and still no recourse. It just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem fair.
I've talked to a number of survivors who say that they have to go begging for money for therapy, and they ask for so much and they only get this much, and they have to go back. And one of their big complaints is the diocese no one's ever called them to say, "How are you doing?"
In fact, some of the complaints that the survivors also make is that, especially when the allegations first come to light. Now we're talking, a lot of these cases are, again, decades old, in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. When they're presented to the church officials, they're made to feel, the victims, survivors, are made to feel as if they've done something wrong.
I talked to one of the survivors who finally went to the church years ago, and they sent her to a counselor, and the counselor kept asking her, "Did you find him good looking?" And she quit counseling because she's like, it was victim blaming. Now the church says they've changed, obviously, since then. They say that that would never happen today, but it did happen to her, and she's still living with that.
Obviously, you had to dig through a lot of archives to report on this story. What are you holding in your hand there?
Well, there were 3 sisters who were all raped by Father Sullivan back in the 1958. The Viventi sisters lived in Walker. And the family sent us a bunch of black and white photographs from back in the day. And this is a picture from June 1958 of Mary Viventi, who was 7 years old. And she's sitting in her front yard in front of the grotto with the Virgin Mary in it that Father Sullivan asked her dad to build. And in the picture, she's sitting on some stones, and she's wearing a white dress, and she's bent over, and she writes on a sticky note she included with the picture, "My body was in spasm. I could hardly stand up straight." And this was after several of the assaults. It was right after her first Holy Communion. He had started raping her just before her first Holy Communion.
Talk a little bit about, in a broad sense, how absolutely sickening this particular type of abuse is, because it's a violation, Ken, on so many different levels. It's a person of trust. It's someone that maybe will be able to tell their side of the story and make you believe that maybe you're telling the lie. You know what I mean? There's someone in a position of authority.
Priests. I mean, these people.
And who's going to believe the victim? Who's going to believe the survivor?
People saw them as God, or a direct connection to God. In fact, some of these women we talked to, when they went to confession, because they thought what they were doing, having sex with a priest at the age of 12 or 14, was a mortal sin. So they went to their priest for confession, and it was Father Sullivan.
The church, and this has been well documented, took great lengths to cover this up. They simply moved the priest around. They didn't tell the new community this person was coming, and they shipped him off.
Father Sullivan might be one of the best examples, maybe even in the country. He had been in New Hampshire, at a diocese there. He had sexually assaulted a teenage girl. She got pregnant. He paid for an abortion that somehow failed. He's got a son out there, if he's still alive, would be 69 years old. And they knew it. And he started shopping himself around to different dioceses. And the New Hampshire Diocese, to their credit, would write them back and say, I would not touch this guy. He's got this history, and they were very descriptive. And the Grand Rapids Diocese said that they had a shortage of priests and will give him a chance.
How has the diocese been as far as transparency, even in the reporting of this story?
Well, before the AG announced its investigation, I had sent them an email with specific questions, and they answered some of those preliminary questions. Once the AG announced its investigation, they've clammed up. We asked for an interview with the bishop. We asked for more specific information about which priests were out there, the abusers who were getting pensions and, health benefits and medical benefits and car insurance paid for. And they have not answered questions. They wouldn't set up an interview with the bishop. So we ended up getting him after a mass.
That is quite a telling confrontation in the story. His body language speaks volumes.
So, is there anything more you'd want to say to these survivors?
First of all, I think that I've been very generous with my time with you.
Yes, you have.
Standing outside
In the cold.
And I have to admit, I'm not too happy with you ambushing me this way.
Can I say that we tried several times to set up interviews and were turned away?
I don't know anything about it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, he accused us of ambushing him, but, as I pointed out to him, we had tried to set up interviews and were denied, and he said he did not know that we had tried to set up an interview with him.
Some dioceses out east, I've seen, even some in Michigan, have gone to the length of printing the names of the priests who have been credibly accused of abuse. Does Grand Rapids, the diocese in Grand Rapids, fall into that category?
Well, it's interesting. Is the only diocese in Michigan so far that's done that is Gaylord. They recently put out a list of the 10 priests and what their status was. Most of them are deceased. We asked the same thing from Grand Rapids, and they did not give us a list. So we went through our archives, the public library, interviewed survivors, went through police reports and court records, and came up with our own list.
And in fact, you went out and tried to talk to some of these priests.
Yeah, mic check.
Check.
Okay.
Father McKenna? Every one of them who is living in West Michigan, we paid a visit to, or at least tried.
Just to get their side of the story.
Yes.
Were they forthcoming at all?
Most of them didn't answer the door, didn't return phone calls. We talked to one who lives up in the Big Rapids area. He said he would consider an interview, and I said, well, what are the odds of that? He said, I probably won't. And then we did confront one who lives in southeast Grand Rapids, but it was, kind of a no comment.
Excuse me, Father Heidens?
Yes, sir.
I'm Ken Kolker from Wood TV. I've left a couple of messages at your door,
Yes, sir.
and I'm working a story about the diocese handling of abuse. And we just figured it was fair to try to give those who were accused, their say in the story. Okay. I mean, have you sought out your survivors to get their forgiveness?
I have no comment.
Okay. All right.
Is that on?
Yes, it is. All right. Thank you.
None of the priests are on the sex offender registry.
None. Only one priest out of the 14 that are on the list was ever convicted of a sex crime. He's been deported. Father Wagner, 6 boys that he molested, he was charged with gross indecency in 1983 and got bumped down to a simple assault, where the judge actually praised him for his service in the church.
That just gives you a little idea of what the survivors are up against.
Well, and then 2 years later, it's when he's sexually assaulting one of the guys we interviewed. He's sexually assaulting him in Caledonia.
Talk a little bit about the backlash, if there was any, or obstacles that you had to work through. Has anything really changed, I guess, as far as getting the Catholic Church maybe to let a little sunshine in here?
It seemed like it was starting to change. I mean, before the AG announced its investigation, they were responding, but like I said, they've clammed up. The same obstacles were in place, back in 2002. I was, In fact, it was really interesting. A few years ago, I ran into the former PR person for the diocese, who part of her job was to be the roadblock. And she actually thanked me for trying to go around the roadblock.
And in fact, in the course of your investigation, as you're going around the neighborhoods and knocking on doors, a lot of the neighbors, as we mentioned, none of these priests are on the sex offender registry. The neighbors weren't quite aware of what had been going on, if they even knew that they had been a priest at all.
Would you rather not know?
I'd rather not, but I do, so.
Yeah.
And I just leave it at that.
Yeah. But you didn't know about the molestation
No,
stuff.
I didn't know about that.
Seems like a nice guy. He sends us a Christmas card. Mom makes a pumpkin bread and drop off, being neighborly.
Yeah.
But
So what do you know of him?
I don't know too much of him. I know he's just a retired preacher, and he worked for, I think, St. Anne's there. That's about all I pretty much know of him.
Denny Wagner's a good example. He lives in Norton Shores, dead-end street, nice home that used to be his father's home. And the neighbors we talked to didn't even know he had been a priest. On his Facebook page, he says he's retired from Sears, retired and loving it.
And he makes no mention of his past in the clergy at all.
No, none at all. And the neighbors we talked to had no idea that he was a priest or that he had that, background.
Ken, you went all over. You went down to Florida to chase this story. What was there?
Well, one of the sisters who was raped by Father Sullivan lives in Central Florida. And she was really the first one we spoke to. And one of the priests from this diocese, who's on that list, lives in Florida. So we also went down looking for him unsuccessfully. But we spoke with, her name is Fran. And what's interesting is, besides the horrific story she tells, is that her son is now a DA in Miami-Dade. And his job is to go after sex offenders of children. And, he says he can't necessarily say that he was inspired by his mom and what happened to his aunts. But his mom says he has called to say this was for Aunt Judy or this was for Aunt Mary. And even though he may not have been inspired to do this, he says what happened to his mom and aunts gives him an understanding of what he's going after. Maybe motivates him a little bit.
Where does the church go from here, Ken? I mean, this is obviously, it's such a massive, entrenched issue for the Catholic Church that they just can't seem to get any traction on.
I think they're hoping that the AG's investigation, the AG took all their records. I mean, they went with a search warrant to all 7 of the dioceses in Michigan, got all the records. I think what they've got to be hoping for is that it'll be all out there. It's nothing to hide anymore. You know what I mean? What's interesting
Full
is
disclosure.
Full disclosure. Yeah, we're not hiding anything. We can't be hiding anything anymore because they have all of our records.
Are we confident that abuse has stopped, at least in West Michigan?
Well, it's interesting. When we spoke with the bishop, I said something about the 2002 being the last case, and he was a little hesitant. And he did say that there could be some awful stories coming out, not necessarily about Grand Rapids, but about the diocese in Michigan.
Well, Ken, it's a great story. Again, we depend on reporters and journalists with your experience to be able to tell these stories because, as we said at the top of the podcast, I can't think of something, a topic that is more gut-wrenching than the abuse of children at the hands of clergy. It is a very sensitive topic. It's one in which we continue to grapple with both in society and within the halls of the church itself. And it's important to at least put some sunshine on this to prevent it from happening again and to provide some accountability for a group that sometimes struggles to find it. Ken Kolker, great job. And again, you can find all of the stories and the information, a lot of the archival footage as well, available over at woodtv.com. We will be, of course, airing these on 24-Hour News 8 throughout the week, so look for updates both on the web and on the mobile app.